Hello, how are you all doing? And welcome to the last of Dystopian Futures in the series. And today we're going to be talking about some quite interesting stuff. So yeah, today is about the future of sex, and I'm going to dial in my fabulous host. Let me just get her in. Internet. Always internet. Hello, how you doing? Can you hear
Hi.
me? Hi.
Yeah, you
Hi.
sound great. How are you, babe?
I'm all right, thank you. I've got like
Oh, the purple light. That's what we're missing.
I got my ring for you. I got my things
I
on
I
it.
have to get my light. I just remembered
Baby,
you
you
requested.
light, you just shine that light all over and smoke it while you do it. Like, yes. Let me just check my connections super quickly. Well, I think we are good. So, hello everybody. Welcome to Dystopian Futures. This is the final episode in Dystopian Futures season 1, and today we're going to be talking about the future of sex. Look at that light, and we have the fabulous Smoky Spice in the building. Tiana
Hey.
from New York. So thank you for anybody joining in from England, from New York, from anywhere else. We're here for you. So, oh my God, that light's great, by the way, Tiana. It looks fabulous.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's my grow light for my weed plant, so
Keep it,
it's fit.
you know what I mean? What else can you do? What else can you do? I haven't seen you for ages. We met in January now, wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
And
Wow.
I kind of fascinated, and I think like when I was making the series, I just thought, right, who can I talk about sex? And you just popped into my mind as this like power woman, black femme goddess who knows her shit. So I was like, hey,
Thank
there's some
you.
conversation out here for all of my black queens and kings and non-binaries and everything in between, especially with what's happening at the moment. I think it's very important to keep the conversations very proactive and creating
Yeah.
space for people to chat about. Yeah. How are you feeling in New York at the moment? What's happening?
Yes, I have mixed feelings being in New York right now. It's Pride Month, so I am like honoring that, and trying to still celebrate, but at the same time, you can't ignore the movement that's happening and the recognition of, Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of just like feeling, and then going through quarantine. So you had like quarantine, and then and then now going into Pride, and then
Everything.
everything, that's happening. So, trying to be aware of what's happening, the suffering, people putting their lives, their bodies on the line, but then also being like, how can I contribute to the movement? What can I do, that is out there, but I don't want to protest, that's not in my power, that doesn't feel like good for what I want to contribute to the movement.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to honor those that are doing that. And one of the things that I tried to talk to people about is that your activism looks differently, so we need to respect that. So if people need to be loud and they need to, take up that space, give them that space, like honor that.
Yeah.
And then if there's other ways that you can show support, as long as you're absorbing the message of like, honoring like recognizing your privilege, no matter where that is, and privilege resides in all of us. Like right now, we're asking people to recognize the privilege and the disparity between Black lives and, other groups. But we all need to check our privilege in general. And for me, that's the bigger message of being like, okay, if I'm a cis presenting woman, even though I'm queer, how can I still help those that are less, if I'm differently abled, how can I help those that are adolescent, you know, so it's like always looking out for each other, because if we help those that are less, the most marginalized, we help all of us, you know, and so that's what's most important.
I think the big thing about this movement is like, it's just to, like you said, checking up everybody's privilege and just being like, we're in this together. And I'm really kind of happy, especially with how people are mobilizing, just like on different levels, you know, people in the street, people are like outside, people online like we are, and just trying to get that kind of positive message across. So you're completely right. You know, before we go any further, I want you to introduce yourself, because I want the people to know who you are, the fabulous lady. So come on, tell us.
Amazing, thank you. Yes, I'm Tiana, also known as Glitosaurus Rex, also known as Smoky Spice. I'm a polyactivist, cannabis enthusiast. I also curate, produce sex-positive, inclusive events, and I am a part of an amazing team of women called the Velvet Tip Collective. We've coined the term the Spice Girls of Sex. And so that's where I get my Smoky Spice moniker from. It's
5 of you in that then. Like,
there are 5 of us as like the main team, but we have friends that are kind of like support spices. So they've donned their own Spice Girl name as well.
I'm just support Spice right now. I'm here for you guys.
Yes, you are support Spice. Yes.
Support Spice. What she looks like.
Yes. No, we need to give you a Spice Girl name. Yes.
Fun. I don't know what it could be. We'll work it out by the end of this, definitely.
Yeah.
Everybody, please feel free to ask questions as we go along. Like, it's an open forum, it's an open conversation. So yeah, if you've got anything to say, please, let us know. So let's start with Spice Girls of Sex then, and like, it's called Velvet.
The Velvet Tip Collective.
Okay, so
yeah.
What kind of things do you do in the Velvet Tip Collective?
Yes, so we started out by curating an event at the House of Yes, which is a performance venue in Bushwick, New York, and we had a bi-monthly residency there where we would curate porn that we would show by independent producers and artists. We try to make sure that the porn that we source is responsible as possible, and that just means that, you know, as far as we're aware, there was consent, you know, on scene. All the sex workers were paid fairly and treated fairly, you know, same with like on the back end of like production and, you know, equal inclusion on that side as well. So keeping that in mind, we also would have a performance that would be sort of sensual or erotic, sometimes a little silly. And then we'd have a panel discussion with people that are in the industry and also somewhat like experts based on the topic that we were talking about. So we would feature films that were themed along the lines of threesomes. We did one on squirting. We did one on splooshing, which is kind of like food play. We did one on sex magic.
Like beans and stuff like that.
It's like beans, it's carrots. It's one did amazing thing called cherry cola, which you will never look at a Coke bottle the same after seeing this film. So
I'm just putting you in, and I'm like, cherry cola. I won't even go. You know, it's so funny. I actually tuned into one a couple of weeks ago, actually. It was a great selection, and you'd selected, like, really big porn artists next to, like, really up-and-coming porn. And I wanted to kind of touch on, you know, we've all been in isolation, right? So porn is, like, a lot of people have been watching porn. I think if anybody haven't, it's probably a big lie. And if they have, like, you know, when you are trying to source your porn for these events, what do you find, like, the issues are with the porn industry? Because it's a $97 billion industry. And when I did my research into it, I was like, wow, it's so surprising that only, like, one company owns most of it. It's like such a big monopoly. And
that's why we try to feature and uplift like independent sex workers, you know, production companies. Math Magazine, who's the account that I'm on right now, the reason I'm not on my Glitosaurus account is because I am banned from IG Live.
Go on, tell us why you're. Are you making your porn on IG Live? Is that what?
Yes, so it's the Cliff Notes version of it is on my own. My little like close dear to my heart is an event I call Imbibe, and it's a cannabis and kink party where I like to feature and showcase alternative forms of play within the fetish community. And then we also enjoyed all kinds of forms of cannabis, whether that's smoking it, eating it, vaping it, drinking it, and we always try to do that responsibly and constantly keep people aware of, like, you know, check in with yourself. If you're going to engage in a scene, tell that person what you've done before you engage in that scene so they can know how to engage with you. And we like to focus on more of the soft aspects of kink, so like rope bondage, fire play, wax play, those sort of things. So leading up to everybody just having open play and it just being everybody doing whatever they want, I like to show sort of like entertaining demonstrations of each of the kinks. So, because there's a lot of people that are new and they don't really know what these things are, what they look like. Yeah. And so to kind of sleep them into, educating themselves and then also maybe experiencing it themselves, for the first time in this space, I have pro doms that I invite and I pay to perform. And so one of my amazing doms and a very dear close to me, Domina Katrina, she was doing a wax play scene with another close friend of mine named Kaya. And Kaya has these beautiful breasts that Instagram was not so happy about seeing on my IG Live.
I start because I got some breast photos too. Because, we're talking about the future of sex. I hope these don't get me banned, though. That's just what I'm trying to think.
Yes. My friend said that was Instagram sending me a warning because they didn't just cut my account off completely. So I'll take I'll take the slap on the wrist of no IG. So Math Magazine.
They're watching you.
Yeah. Exactly. So right. Math has been like amazing and generous. They're close friends of mine. I've actually been featured in their magazine. They're a responsibly curated porn magazine. Nice. And so I'm in their 8th issue. If anyone want to check out my naughty bits, you can.
Like the stuff that you put on Instagram, and I was like, yeah, fair. I wondered what the uncensored bit is, so we'll check on that later and maybe show some pictures. Who knows? I might get banned, though. Let's check that out.
I know, exactly.
Let's talk about kink because we've got so much to talk about. In terms of kink, you're talking about like doing the softer plays of kink, and they seem quite, nice, like easing people into it. A lot of people. Maybe even from my side, might not know what these things are, and how do one question that I wanted to ask first is like, do a lot of Black people seem to come to your parties then, or is it aimed at Black people, or is it aimed at everybody?
Yeah, so I like to curate an inclusive space for everybody, as long as there's not, transphobia, fat phobia, bigotry, like that sort of behavior is not allowed in my space, but everybody else that's love is allowed to be in that space and respect. That being said, I make a very specific point of making sure that there are more POC people and queer people in the space, because for me, that is what I feel is not out there as much. Like, yes, there's amazing, event producers that produce queer spaces for, kink parties. There's even some great, POC people doing, great events. But for me, I felt like there wasn't really a niche of like, just kinky play and cannabis, and so I wanted to set that container for queer people of color specifically. But I actually feel uncomfortable if there's too many Black people or too many white people or too many, unless it's that container you're trying to set. Like if you want an all femme circle, or if you want an all male circle or an all black circle. I understand needing that container, but my event doesn't need that sort of container. I want it to be more open and inclusive. So I invite everybody, and I like it to be like, white people, Jewish people, Asian people, black people, Hispanic, queer, trans, like I want all the lovely bodies there.
100%. And like, basically people are just trying to communicate through their sexuality anyway. So,
exactly.
A space, different angles and different people and different representation feels like it's the right thing to do. In New York, so obviously you said when you came and you were starting these parties, there wasn't anything that did cannabis and kink together. But did you find it quite easy to find like all black kink spaces, or what was missing when you were, obviously the cannabis and the kink, but what is it like being a black woman, a queer black woman as well, trying to find your sexuality in New York?
Yes. So there were not a lot of people of color, women of color in these spaces. If you did, they're like less than a handful. We can count them on one hand, really. And I'm including myself on that hand. So, and then it got to a point where I actually made it my mission to gather people of color that I saw at these parties, and then I started a group on Instagram called United Colors of Polykink. That was sort of just being like, hey, you're not alone. There's more of us. Come over here, There are things called munches, which are like meetups for kinky people that are just like not in a dungeon setting. You meet in like a restaurant or a bar. You're like kind of in plain clothes, and you just and they're tailored for specific kink groups. So they have like POC munches for like POC kinksters that definitely exist. So I don't want to like not acknowledge like there are groups out there, but they're kind of like you gotta search for them. You gotta dig, and if you just show up at a party, most of the time there's not going to be that much diversity. And then even with queerness, there's not even that much diversity with queerness always.
And that's a big shame. Why do you think that is?
Oh, that's I think a multi-tiered question. One, I think part of our community, we don't see ourselves in that way. We don't want to engage in that way. Part of that is like our own shame, our own stigma, our religion. Like we could go through the list of, what, the things that kind of hold people of color back in their sexuality. But especially then when you talk about kinks, it's another layer to it beyond that. And then I think sometimes it's accessibility. People are in certain parts of it. New York is a hub. So I'm blessed in that way. And I talk about checking my privilege. I check my privilege of having that access, to having all that diversity where others don't, So it's harder for them to, if you're in a middle of America where already your population is lower as a person of color, and then you're a kinky person of color, that is probably even lower than that, so when you go into these spaces, so it's about partly access, and then I think sometimes it's about pricing. Kink can be expensive, toys can be expensive, the parties can be expensive. One of my biggest pet peeves that I'm actually starting to be a bit more vocal about is that these event coordinators will offer volunteer positions for, a sliding scale for people that may not be able to afford a ticket. But then when you arrive at the party, most of those people are people of color that are the volunteers. And they don't seem to have a problem with that. But I do, to the point where I would make it a point where I would not volunteer. Like I always bought a ticket, or I always came with someone that bought me a ticket. Yeah. So, with my resources. But so because I felt like it was important to see like us Black and brown people not just, in a service position in these environments and then just there for pleasure. So it's like we serve you and then we please you. And then that's what our bodies are for. And it's just like, oh, that doesn't sit right and feel right to me, So those are the things that I'm trying to be more vocal about, especially now that people are actually listening.
No, I like it. And it's so deep rooted as well. And, I think if we don't keep making spaces or accessibility for sexual exploration generally, you know, the education in different culture groups, so it's just going to be a lot weaker. And, you know, Kink seems to be such a big community, and it has so many kind of multifaceted areas to explore that we really love the people in it. No, you're completely right. It's so funny because so I was looking into, I've got to ask you, what is your favorite kink actually before I start?
Oh my. That can sometimes change. I
Now.
Right, yeah, right now.
Yeah.
The overarching category would be sensation play.
Okay.
And so I'm more of a pleasure slut than a pain slut. And that's the other thing. People think like they only associate pain with kink and BDSM, and it's like, no, there's a whole other spectrum of pleasure. And some people get pleasure from pain, but you can just get pleasure from pleasure, you know? That's also an option. So I love things that have to do with my skin, you know, so like fire play is a really favorite one of mine. Wax play is a really big favorite one of mine. I love the flogger toy, which is kind of like, it has the handle with like the tails that come out of it. The Wartenberg wheel, which kind of like has the spikes, and you can just, you know, run that along your arm or over your nipple.
Do you? Or is it just like a ticklish sensation, basically?
For the Wartenberg wheel?
Yeah.
So it depends. There's different size, depends on how long the spokes are and also how many there are. So you can have a single, you can have a double, they can be two-pronged. So depending on that, they can have different sensations, and depending on what part of the body. So the arm is going to feel different than like the collar because it's thinner skin. So it's going to be a bit more sensitive. So like around the nipple is going to be like, you know, really intense. So it's not very painful. It can be ticklish depending on what part of your body, you know, is being touched.
Yeah.
But it's always just kind of like one of those like gets you like into your body, you know, like it's very rare that like you think about what your skin feels like, you know, so it's very intriguing.
I hate you. And then talking about like the pain side, I think, is it you who did the needle play workshop, or did you just attend one? And what is that, just for people who might not, because, you know, it goes in so many different directions, so I just want to give people a bit of an overview.
Absolutely. I actually attended a needle play workshop that one of my really good friends, Lola Jean, and she's a pro dom as well as her other friends, invited me to attend with them. This group called Tess. They are a kink organization that does events. They do a huge conference where they basically take over a hotel every year, and then it's this kinky hotel. Like they do different workshops. People were like doing scenes in the pool and, you know, in the hallways and in the rooms. So it's really amazing. It's like kinky wonderland. So they did a smaller workshop in the city about needle play that I was invited to, and it was so exhilarating, so amazing. I hadn't at that point done needle play yet, and needle play is essentially taking like a different size gauge needles and then piercing the skin. So going through the skin with like different size gauge needles. And so the
cool as hell. It sounds really big.
It is, but it's like if you've ever gotten a shot, it's no more painful than when you get a flu shot.
Okay.
So it's like on the spectrum of pain, and everybody experiences pain differently. So I don't want to speak to everybody's pain tolerance. But as far as like if everybody can identify with maybe getting a flu shot or immunization of some kind and what that experience was like. So it's kind of that. When they first pierce the skin, but then she has to go through the other side of the skin. So then you have that double experience of the flu shot.
It sounds like so painful. So I want to know if anybody is even here and likes needle play. I'd love to know, you know, what the sensation you love about it. You know, is it the pain? Is it the kind of obedience? Is it, you know, yeah, what is it? Because there's so many things going on there, right? You're like putting your pain threshold in the power of somebody else's hands, and I think that does rule a lot of the kink scene anyway, you know, this whole kind of
Trust.
foul play or like, just,
Yeah.
like, and you have to trust them people as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mackenzie says, I'd love to try. You should definitely try. Are you in?
Yay. Oh, Mackenzie is the owner of Math Magazine. Hey, Mackenzie. Mackenzie here to support. Yes. No, it's really amazing experience. And it was funny because after I did that workshop, I then went to an event with Lola and her friends, and we saw the instructor at the party. And so I just went up to her and I was like, I loved your class. It was so amazing. You know, I am really into needle play right now. She was like, oh, well, you know, I don't have any pin cushions tonight. And I was like, yes, you do. Can I please be your pin cushion? So
it's true.
So much fun.
Well, this is it. And one thing I was looking at, especially in Kink, and I think this is something that we should touch on, you know, I was also looking at knife play and stuff like that. And, you know, to a lot of people, this might be a bit too scary, you know, scary concept, because like it's about kind of feels a lot more like it's a life or death situation, because when you see a knife and somebody's got a knife onto you, that could mean absolutely anything. But I wanted to talk about how like these more painful methods of kink actually help people in their mental health, and like Mackenzie said, like reframing pain and stuff like that. And what do you think that it has for people to play like that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, like, for example, having the needle play experience was a very intimate one I had with the Dom, because she was penetrating me. And that was a penetration that I had never received before. And it was a very intimate kind of experience for us to connect in that way. And so when we did, you know, before, you know, like you said before, trust and pre-negotiations before the scene happens are very important. So everybody knows what's going on and it's pre-agreed to before you get into what we call subspace, which is just sort of like a meditative space, because you're allowed to let go and, you know, allow yourself to just, it's like we compared it to like a Zen meditative kind of headspace. And so because you're in that, you're allowing someone to trust someone to take you through that journey of what you pre-negotiated at the beginning. And so that's why it's very important to, you know, have a safe word, or even have like a soft safe word, you know, so that if something needs to like maybe slow down, you know, you could say that yellow kind of word, but if it's red, it stops, you know, all things stop. So you have that communication, and you know that you can, you know, like you said, if you wanted to, and I say this with a disclaimer at the end, where if you want to use kink as a modality to go through trauma, or use it as a form of therapy, you know, people say that because it's a controlled situation where you can relive something with someone that you trust, and you can tell them to stop at any point, compared to when you were in that other situation, you didn't have that same kind of control. And so that being said, depending on what the trauma is, you should probably parallel this, and this is the disclaimer, everybody, listen up, if you're working out in trauma, with an actual therapist, and with therapy that is like kink informed. Because if you have a therapist that doesn't really understand why you're using kink as your modality to, you know, do this, then it's not going to be the most beneficial therapy for you, you know, no matter what. So, you know, being aware of what and there are amazing therapists out there. There's, you know, therapists that are also sex workers, or sex workers, you know, or therapists that work with sex workers. So those resources are definitely out there. Lola Jean is actually one of them. And so, yeah, she's a therapist and a sex worker. So one of the things when I started working with her, and as a pro dom, and I was like, what book should I read as a pro dom? She was like, therapy books. And I was like, go.
Actually, she knows. She knows.
It's like, read therapy books if you want a pro dom.
She could be really dangerous, because she knows how to get into your head like, oh my God.
Exactly.
But below after. I'm sure a lot of people might want to speak to her. So no,
Oh, yeah, no, I will. I'll add her.
everybody who's just joined, we're talking about the future of sex. And my name is Laura, and we are joined by Tiana, Smoky Spice, all the way from New York. I'm in the UK, in London. And, I think the reason why I like talking about this is because, as an experimental music artist, I like to use the idea of kink, the whole idea of power play, and also the aesthetic as well. I like to use that a lot in what I do, and I think it just fits really perfectly. And I think a lot of people don't really know too much about the scene, and I'd like to see more representation in this scene as well. Just generally, even doing my research into it, it doesn't seem that there's more representation in there, so I'd like to see that too. One thing that I wanted to say is maybe just more about the radicalness of using your body for kink. I think it's quite an activist stance. If we look at the likes of Aude Lorde and stuff like that, she's always talking about women having power through the erotic and having the pure joy and that kind of exhilaration that if you are able to reach that kind of nirvana, nobody can oppress you really. And it's a really interesting thing. And I look at kink and think, well, and look at the amount of POC women practicing, or POC or non-binary or POC people practicing it, and I just think there's such a disconnect in there. Obviously, there's a lot of things going on, but I just wanted to ask you what you thought about the pleasure activism that we can get from our bodies, basically.
Yes, definitely. That is definitely something that has been talked about, and I think now more than ever, it's being put to the forefront. And so the kink community is trying to respond to that. So we'll see what happens, once we get past post-corona, because it's kind of hard to say, they could post what they want on Instagram and they could say what they want, but once we get past this and then people are at their events again, are they hiring more people of color as their service tops at their events? Are they including them as their event curators, and event producers, so that, they're part of the conversation, so that not just attending the party, but helping host the party? Because that's the thing, is they want people of color's money, but they don't create a space that actually makes them feel comfortable and welcome. And so they're just counting us. They're okay, well, we have 5. That, that's enough. And then they take a few. What'd you say?
It's a quota kind of thing.
It's a quota, exactly. Yes, it's a quota, instead of it actually being we want you here, we welcome you here, and we have people that look like you, also doing these other things that are on our side of the team too, and I think that's the conversation that people are starting to look at now of how inclusivity actually looks like, and we have to hold these same people accountable past this hashtag movement that's happening right now. So and especially in the porn industry, there's you sort of mentioned before, absolutely exploiting the Black body is prevalent there. There's definitely now been a huge push for companies to, recognize and change, the imaging and what they're even using as their language,
Just because there's a Black woman having sex, why does she have to be called Ebony? I never got that. I don't know I've never met an Ebony before in my life. But also, anybody who wants to be called Ebony either, unless it's a name. You know what I mean? So I'm on that whole flex with you as well. And I'm really glad that you are seeing kind of the light at the end of the tunnel with representation in kink, because ultimately, as soon as you take up that space, as soon as our bodies and our characters and our influence takes up that space and adds and contributes to that space, I can't imagine what will come out of it. I think there'll just be so many more better educated people, and people just having a lot more better better sex. Why?
Yes, I think and hope so, especially after going through quarantine and we're so touch starved, you know, and we need that sort of intimacy and connection, not just, you know, through this virtual way. But it's also been interesting because the leaps of virtual interaction have also increased because of this new demand. And so the accessibility of like, even, you know, the rise of OnlyFans, you know, people turning to sex work and turning to virtual ways of like making money that they would not have considered before. So it's interesting now the social conversation's shifting.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good point, because OnlyFans is an interesting thing that, you know, it increases the accessibility to porn and sex, doesn't it, really? Because anybody out there can do it and they can get paid for it. So I think it's...
They should. Yes, pay for porn, people.
Pay for porn. Pay for porn. No, it's true. It's true. I wanted to ask you about, like, you know, your events and your play, and specifically, like, and the wider context. How has COVID affected it? And you've touched on OnlyFans, but please elaborate on the greater things that have happened with COVID and play.
Yes. So all of our events that I had planned personally, that I was collaborating with other people on, that my team, the Velvet Tip, you know, we're working on, canceled.
Yeah.
All the window. And for the foreseeable future, and the conversation of how different event producers are trying to slowly re-engage with different, you know, social connection activities has been an interesting one, because we're still in a pandemic, you know, it's not like it's over, you know, so we technically should still be isolating and distancing and not really gathering the way that we should be, you know, so it's kind of the conversation for those kind of events is very chaotic, to be quite honest with you. There's no
push it online. Then have you found like more kink events happening online? Have you found more, I don't know, about interactions and stuff? Yeah, I just like to explore that more, because some people probably don't even know about this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So it's funny because there definitely has been a spike of virtual play parties. And what's funny to me is the way that I actually got into the kink and play party community was watching an episode on Showtime that I forget, this woman did a expose on virtual play parties.
Okay.
And so this was like maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, you know, that I saw this, and I was like, virtual orgy, like, oh, that sounds so crazy and naughty. And then I experienced one, and I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. It kind of reminded me of like Chatterbait, you know, but like instead of just a bunch of people typing at you, you actually could like see and enjoy each other. But then to me, I was like, no, I want the real thing. I want to like smell it. I want to taste it. I want to breathe it. I want to feel all fitted.
I just want to, okay.
I want to be in it. Exactly. So then that's how I found my community, or my different communities. Because I feel like I don't really belong to just any one. Yeah. And then now come back to virtual space of like needing to connect and orgy and play party, you know, virtually is like really funny to me. That now that's come full circle. So yeah, there's Utopia Rising is a great group. They are a queer inclusive community that you have to actually submit like, you know, a questionnaire, you know, so that everyone is vetted before they enter, you know, get invited to their events, which is really great. My friends NSFW have been doing some events that are virtual. I'm trying to think of who else has been doing some virtual events. Yeah, if you go on FetLife.com, FetLife is a really great resource for like kink parties, play parties, and so all the virtual things that have been there as well. We did 24-hour porn film festival, and we were able to raise over $4,000, and all the donations actually went to Glitz, which is the charity that is mentioned right there. She said P2P. Yes, pass the porn. Yes, pass the porn. Did the 24-hour porn film festival. It was so bananas. Just like everybody, like there was I think over 100 people. Like, oh no, it's like close to 200 people like that were consistent, you know, throughout. Like sort of like 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. it dropped down, you know, a little bit, but like then as the sun was rising again, everybody had their computers back up and came through the home stretch with us.
To see the curation, like fair. I think when I tuned in, it was like Eric Lust and something. There was another group about how lipstick stays on from. You know what I mean?
Yes, from blowjob. Yes.
And I was like, cute. This is information people need to know.
Yes.
Yes. Beautiful, right? Because ultimately what COVID has done, it's decentralized, like, even the access to get into these parties, because now you can access a party in Brazil, you could access a party in London, you can access a party in New York. You can have kinky fun with people across the whole wide world, and obviously you can't touch people, but if you really wanted to kind of get off in an exciting new way, like these parties could be a vibe to you. So yeah,
definitely. Yeah, no, it's definitely been interesting. So yeah, people have been creating really cool virtual experiences where, you know, you go in one room and then you can have different rooms that you break off into, where there's like one that's being erotic poetry and one that's a bit more kinky, or one they're having like a cuddle puddle, you know. So there's people are really getting creative with how they're adapting, you know, real world to virtual world.
Yeah, no, and I think that should that should move us on to the next bit, actually, because I want to talk about like the future of sex. And obviously we're in a pandemic now, we've been locked down, you are building this kind of kink space, especially for building a lot of POC representation in New York, and I'm sure that same thing is happening in the UK as well. But like, when you sit down now and think, right, all of everything that's accessible to me, you know, have you looked at the new technologies that are out for sex? Like, let's start there. That's good.
Yeah, I was actually, it's funny you say that, because I knew I was going to be on the math channel. I was actually looking through the issue that I have here with me, and they have this really awesome feature of like this guy who makes sex toys that couples can use together. And I just thought that was so cool and amazing, of like, because like usually sex machines are like loud and have big motors and like really like more for the male gaze and not so much for female pleasure, and they definitely don't allow for, you know, couples or, you know, a group to engage together, you know. So I love the idea of like, you know, people encouraged to use sex toys and, you know, sex machines in a way that can like enhance their pleasure instead of it being like a threat to the male, you know, or like replacing a penis, or, you know, taking away from, you know, the pleasure in any way. So
yeah, why should it be? Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Well, we just won't need the men anymore. So that's
yeah, so it's like taking it beyond, you know, sex is just for reproductive purposes, you know, taking away that shame and like replacing it with like, okay, what can we do and use this together that increases our intimacy and pleasure together. And I guess the other thing that I feel like is what I feel is the future of where sex technology is going is not necessarily the technology itself, but who is using it and the access. So like the elderly getting more access, you know, and getting more in touch with their bodies, you know, women that are past menopausal age, you know, like having more orgasms, using more sex toys. My amazing friend, Dr. Jana, also wrote this article about parents and talking to their kids and giving their kids a sex toy, you know, and starting that conversation. So when you're talking about sex and giving them a vibrator so that they can enjoy their pleasure before they engage with somebody else.
And understanding their body. So this is one thing that I wanted to talk about, because, you know, with the rise in like virtual reality, like sex has been a really big thing that virtual reality has always focused on. But, you know, the bad side of that is like, you know, just people just derogatively using sex, and it's not consensual. All of that stuff, that's the bad side of just what goes with porn. But the good side of it is like talking about how can they use virtual reality for sex education, and how can they use virtual reality to basically enable younger kids to explore, not kids, but teenagers to explore their bodies and actually explore their sexuality as well. Because then in the virtual reality, you can look down and you might be a different gender. How do you feel about that? You know, what kind of gender are you? You know, all of these questions that people have on a daily basis, but we've never been able to kind of articulate it properly without that kind of shame and stigma, which creates the kind of closed community when it talks about sex, which is actually the most natural thing that people could be doing.
And we wouldn't be here without it.
Yeah, we wouldn't, definitely. One thing that I found dead interesting, so when I was looking at the virtual reality, I also saw the ability, you've seen the AI sex dolls, right? They're called
Yeah.
So there's a development that basically thinks that what people will start using that kind of like harmony thing for is to create a doppelganger of your ex-lover. How mad would that be if you like took in a picture and you were just like, I want a doppelganger of this, and then you just had it in your closet? Whoa.
Yeah, there was like a Black Mirror episode that was like that. So
yes. And he just kept rebooting. She kept rebooting him, didn't she?
Yeah. Yes.
It's coming.
It's actually happening now. So it was kind of like surreal when, you know, you sent me that and I looked it up and I was like, okay, wow, art is reflecting reality too, a little too much. Mackenzie said it could be great for disabled people too. So yes, that is amazing. And that's, I think, one of the beauties of how sex tech can enhance and improve, you know, pleasure is like, yes, helping people with differently abled bodies, for sure.
And obviously helping people who might have social anxiety or anything like that. So it's differently able minds and bodies. You know, there is an app in Japan who people have got married to. You know, it's like Siri, and it's like Alexa. It turns all your house lights on and everything. It can turn your heating on. But the most important thing, what it does do, it like texts you through the day to be like, oh, how are you? When are you coming back? I need to find the name of it. I think it's called it's a Japanese, like, it's kind of a blur in the lines between sex and emotional kind of intimacy, like, you know, actually more emotional intimacy than sex. And people have been married to this amazing thing. People take her on dates, you know, they have the app so they can take it out of the house, or they go back to the house and they have her. It's not her, but it is kind of like that's probably what the film was built on. But, you know, what I wanted to kind of understand, because there's so much happening in sex tech right now, all of these ways, even like having augmented reality, like, or holograms of your favorite celebrity that you can have sex with, you know, these kind of things, do you think it's kind of removing the intimacy in some way?
I think it's creating a different kind of intimacy. Yeah. I think it's like redefining, you know, intimacy. So for that person that's engaging, I feel like with that hologram, that is an intimate, you know, moment for them. You know, that is a real moment of connection, if that's, you know, how they choose to engage. So I think it's just going to just change and broaden, which is always a good thing for us to broaden how we see and redefine intimacy, because people will need different kinds of intimacy. I mean, if we continue quarantine and corona, you know, as we will, these kind of things may be helpful for people's mental health, you know? So I don't think that it is something that we should, shame or think that it's going to take away from, I think we should see it as like, what ways can it benefit? What ways can it add?
100%. And intimacy is a big part of sex anyway for a lot of people, you know what I mean? Like, that is the start and the root of the sex that they want to have. So I think it could be definitely beneficial. The one thing, like, obviously kink play is very based on, a lot of the time it's based on either mental kind of detachment or a lot of touch. So how would these new developments help kink play, or is it something different? I don't know.
These new developments in regards to kink,
technology, sex,
it's interesting to say that. I guess off the top of my head, I feel like for certain things where if you don't have access to find someone to do a scene with, if there's a certain kink that you can't, exercise, with someone that's in your proximity for whatever reason, you can use this as a way to like still get that out and like, in a safe container. So because suppression is not healthy, not exercising that or pretending it doesn't exist is not healthy, So for me, I guess my concern is, especially as we're having this social racial conversation of like being careful of how we're using this technology to maybe exercise fantasies that border on, the racial, play aspect of things. And I don't just mean like black and white. I could mean like people exercising like Nazi Jewish fantasies, or like certain taboos, so it's like those are more intense conversations that we need to have, on the ethical front, because it's like, if you have even like a taboo of like age play, like, that pedophiles exist. So if you have a VR situation, is that okay or is that not okay? So, like these are the kind of conversations that like we can't shy away from as these things are becoming more of our reality.
And as well, they were talking about that specific thing in VR, like having a VR for people who have these taboo and obviously illegal kind of fantasies. Will that actually increase the practice of illegal activity that's harming the community, or will it decrease it? Nobody's sure yet. So it's like, of no regulation in this kind of sex tech industry. And what does that start building? I think it does start building a lot more like fetishes and a lot more kind of control for people to be able to be themselves. But what detriment does that have to community generally?
I think the start of that is helping decriminalize consensual sex work, you know? And so that people that are, doing consensual sex work have safe spaces that they can do that work. They have protection, they have rights, they can get health care, they can get mental health, so I feel like that's the first step in, creating that container, because those are the people that are usually going to be the ones that are helping everybody else with the technology, or a part of that. So, and I think it's like, we keep like not acknowledging, or that's not the right word. I think if like with Sosa Fosta is a law here in the U.S., which is to like stop sex trafficking, but what it did, unfortunately, was hurt consensual sex workers. Right. And so even though the intention was good to like, nobody wants sex trafficking. Like I think as a community, we all agree with that. But the way that they decided to protect those people harmed an entire other group of people that they just decided to disregard. And so as we move into the tech space, we can't make those same mistakes of like disregarding, and not acknowledging that.
Disregarding, and like we also, anything that we build has our own prejudice in it, and it's about who's building it as well, and like making sure that, people of color, different kind of fetishes and stuff are all kind of taken care of when we're trying to build these things. Do I had a really good idea while you were talking. I was like, so there's apps obviously that like help. For instance, sex tech is not just obviously the stuff that you can have sex with. It's more the mental kind of play that goes with sex and tech as well. There's technology that helps like women come to orgasm. There's technology that just basically just tells you how to look at your body. What if you just put like dom chat or submissive chat into like a chat bot, and then that person who wasn't able to have like sex, or they weren't able to access a dom or a sub or whatever, we're getting that kind of still a viral sensation next to somebody who isn't real, but like they get all of that pleasure that they want, you know, because isn't that what like FetLife and stuff like that is anyway? You know, if you're not going to meet people, it's basically a chatbot.
Yeah, you can have direct messages. There's like groups that you can like join and like chat with. So you can really make own communities depending on what niche you are in.
Yeah, no, it's true. And, you know, like, I just think a lot of people would, I wonder as well, because, you know, so for instance, BDSM is someone that a lot more people know because of like 50 Shades of Grey and all of that stuff, you know, and everybody's like, oh my God, I'm a Kinkster. And it's like, but there's so much more to explore. But if you really like BDSM or you want to try it, I just think these like entry level chatbots and stuff would be a vibe.
No, I think the more accessible we make these things, because everybody learns and absorbs information differently. So the more accessible we make the information, of, you know, these kind of, especially if it's like 50 Shades of Grey, as wide received as it was, is not the great kink resource. You know, it's just like, so we need, you know, people and like actual images of what kink looks like, you know, so any kind of conversations, any kind of images that can project like the reality as opposed to like the perception, I think benefits everybody understanding it more and can self-accept their own kind of kinky side, because everybody's got a little kink in them.
I think everybody has, yeah, definitely. And a lot of it's shame that usually stops people from kind of exploring that 100%. We're down to like the last 2 minutes now, actually. We've been chatting. I've been loving it so much. Yes, girl, so nice to see you.
You're so amazing.
No, it's like, I think it's really positive to have these conversations, especially as brown, black women, femme, queer, everything, just anybody, just to have these conversations and have them in the open, because what you're basically saying is right. We're not going to be able to develop our minds sexually or the desires and our minds sexually if we don't keep having these conversations, because it's not a taboo, it's just sex. So like, let's kind of talk about that, you know.
Yes.
Before we finish, I just want to say, does anybody have any questions or anything? Mackenzie, I'll take your money. What about taking your money, right? We would like to, for anybody who's been watching this and has the ability to donate and feels like they want to donate, we've got Glitz below. So this is the chosen charity to donate to. And do you want to just explain what Glitz do, by the way, Tiana?
Yes, Glitz. Oh, yes. Glitz is the amazing nonprofit organization run by Miss Cayenne. She is a beautiful trans woman of color. She helps trans sex workers, and she sees like in all the ways that you want to be an exceptional human being, like Miss Cayenne is that. So she is an activist. She helps support her community. And if you want to like give your money and know that it's going straight to people, Glitz is that organization. And that's what I ride so hard for them, because she's offering homes for sex workers that don't have it or that are being evicted because of what they do. She's offering homes to trans people because they get discriminated against for work or for housing. So she's like that community there for our most marginalized. And in this rhetoric that's happening right now, we need to support the most marginalized. And Miss Cayenne has been doing it for decades. Like, she's already been here. Everybody's just trying to catch up to what she's already been doing. So yes.
Let's move her, like, we love it.
I wanted to,
you know,
hug.
oh yeah. Yes, and like a massive out to Math as well for having us on the platform. I think it's like a perfect platform to start these and continue these conversations, you know, and kind of keep hosting these thought and think tanks I see. Go on, are you showing a picture? You better not have your nipples out.
No, it's a safe one.
This is really cute. This is gorgeous.
So it's me and my former partner, Orion. We did an anal scene that Mackenzie happened to film. So it was
Send
very
pictures after because I don't want to get blocked, babe. I don't want to get blocked. Do not start sharing the pictures on here. Not like Gloria, close her up. You know, before we finish then, so we are down to last minute, and I just have to say a massive shout out to the lady who has been doing the visuals behind of these sexy mamacitas. Like, they are hitting it hard. Like, I'm jealous because every single time I see this, I'm just like, yeah.
Yes.
It's
loving it.
You know what I mean? So this is a Naizi 2.0, Liniya Lavine, and I will literally post her stuff on my page in a couple of days. Thank you everybody for coming to the last of Dystopian Futures season 1. My name is Gloria. I have been host for the last 5 weeks, and yeah, we're in London here and